Kiss of Death by Neon Zangetsu, Chapter 4, Kiss of Fury. Beware a parent's wrath. Salem, Kiss of Fury. No one moved. Naruto watched Ozma like a hawk. Ozma gaped back at him, a fish out of water. Salem watched them both as she awaited the latter's answer, her serene visage reflecting none of the inner turmoil she felt within. And oh, was there turmoil! Naruto felt it as keenly as if it were his own, every bit of it. He wished he couldn't. Things would have been better if he'd lost the ability to sense negative emotions, but he couldn't, and he hadn't. Even now he could feel the cloud of distress radiating off her like a physical thing. Shock, anger, and fear. So much fear. She was absolutely terrified. Celine leaned into him and he gave her a little nudge in return. It was enough to reactivate her. Well, don't just stand there gasping. She put a brave front, grabbing Ozma by the elbow and reeled him into their home. Come inside already! The resurrected man made a face and staggered after, but otherwise didn't offer much in the way of resistance. That was a good thing, right? And yet Naruto couldn't bring himself to lower his guard all the time. All the same, to his superior senses, Ozma was a teeming cauldron of roiling emotion, one threatening to boil over at any moment. There was shock of his own, of course, and relief, but anger as well. Most of it was distress. It was directed at him. A dark impulse stirred within Naruto's soul. If he kept glaring at him like that, "Papa, why are you angry?" Winnie wriggled in his arms, capturing his attention. Such a sweet girl. She'd always been sensitive to strong emotions. "Daddy's not angry. Why don't you run along and wake up your sister?" Naruto set her down and nudged her towards the stairs. "We'll have dinner ready in a bit." "Really?" Amber eyes lit up at the prospect of food. "Kay." She hopped forward in a surprising display of dexterity for one so small, and squeezed him with her might. "Love you." Slim arms folded around his right leg as her claws dug into him. Naruto bore with the pain patiently. Truly, it was like being grabbed by a baby dragon when he didn't know her own strength. That girl is too pure for this world. Naruto felt his mouth creased in a smile as he gazed down at her. "Love you too." The smile that followed nearly gave him a heart attack. Good girl, his girl, must protect at all costs. Some might have thought Winnie frightful given her unusual appearance, her slitted eyes, pointed ears, azure hair, patches of gray-scaled skin, and fangs clearly proved that she wasn't human. Some people were fools. This was their child. Anyone who said otherwise would go suck a lemon. She wasn't normal. Who decided that? She was a monster. And who decided that? She couldn't have a happy life. Again, who decided that? He decided such things. If anyone laid hand on his little bundle of joy, the hand was coming off, and the arm besides. She was the first of their children, and she wouldn't be the last. Not if Salem had anything to say about it. "Off you go then." He tapped her forehead. "Chop chop. Be right back." Naruto risked a glance back to Salem as their daughter scampered up the stairs at a pell-mell pace, bare feet slamming against the wooden steps. By now his wife, and didn't he just love the ring to that, had since guided Ozma to the couch, and a good thing too, because the poor man looked fit to collapse. His tan face was pallid, and one could see sweat on his brow. "You look awful," she murmured. "Here, have some water." She accepted the clay cup with polite gratitude. "I will, thank you." Well, no point in then delaying it any further. Schooling his face into an impressive mask, Naruto took his place on her right side. Salem leaned back into him almost immediately. Her right hand sought his and threaded her fingers through them. He felt her palm tremble within his and returned the gesture. Salem liked to touch, as if to be reminded herself that he was still there. Naruto loved her for her physicality. He did not, however, love the stress seeping from her thoughts right now. "Right then, Ozma, was it?" So he faced the bull in the room and gripped it by the horns. "How are you alive?" To the naked eye, the night appeared to weigh his words. For a long, ponderous moment, Naruto's senses stretched deeper. By now, he had centuries to perfect the art of sensing negative emotions, and such the moment he felt Ozma even considered the possibility of lying. He pounced. "No, no, nuh-uh." He wasn't having it. He was already wary of the man. Any lie or attempt to mislead them wouldn't be tolerated. No falsehood here. The truth, would you kindly? He forced the word through a tight smile that had entirely too many teeth. It was intentional on his part. I'll know if you're lying. Ozma drew his own conclusion from that. Naruto let him. Ah, you have magic then. I wasn't aware there was a survivor. That's fortunate, I suppose. What's this now? Salem's gaze snapped at him, red eyes slitted. You would lie to me after all this time apart? It wasn't not my intent to deceive. He hedged merely that my story might not be too fantastic to believe. Salem arched an eyebrow. We live in an age of gods and monsters. Her tone frosted over the wrath of her words, becoming bitter frost, as she gazed at the man who had once been her beloved. The former may have departed, but I wouldn't put it past them to try something. They are petty children, after all. Naruto couldn't quite hold back his snort. Children is putting it mildly, a bunch of brats in need of a good spanking, more like. Ozma made a hushing gesture. You shouldn't speak ill of the gods. They're always watching. Salem's other brow rose to regard him in thinly veiled scorn. You do realize they cursed me, do you not? Ozma deflected. That's fair, I suppose. Naruto grinned. Start talking. Ozma told them his tale, halting at first, but with increasing confidence when neither interrupted him. And what a tale it was! Naruto found himself gritting his teeth by the end of it, not from what the God of Light had done. Now that initial shock had abated, he realized it was something the horned bastard would do. No, it was Ozma that he was still hiding something. He didn't know what, but it was undoubtedly there, a kernel of fear among the truth. But what? He didn't know, and because he didn't know, he couldn't call him on it without seeming a jealous idiot. Salem shook her head. Hypocrites. They wouldn't revive you before, yet they did now because it suited their needs. And what of you two? Once more Ozma gaze sought the rings on their entwined hands. When did this happen? And there was the tension again. Thanks ever so much, Ozma. Try as he might, Naruto couldn't hate the man. A part of him wanted to, but he just wasn't able to commit to it. Reincarnation was bad enough, but to come back and find that life had moved on without you, he wouldn't be quick to adjust either. Hell, he'd probably feel the same if the shoe was on the other foot. Unpleasant thought that. Eons ago, Salem pushed her fury forgotten. He found me after I burned down a forest. Her pale face flushed faintly, and she looked away. I suppose you could say we hit it off from there. That's putting it mildly, Kurama scoffed. The two of you have been at it like rabbits. Honestly, it's a miracle you don't have more children. Naruto felt the tips of his ears burn pink, but Ozma persisted with his line of inquiry. In the grim outside, nothing to concern yourself. She clicked her tongue. They obey us. Ozma blinked. Us? Salem gaze swept back to Naruto. It's all right. She patted his hand. You can show him. Ozma's a good man. Would a good man keep secrets? Would a good man lie? Would a good man glare at him like that? Words bubbled in the back of his head, ready to leap to his tongue. He bit back the retort and conceded the point. The sooner they got this over with, the sooner their lives would resume. With a long suffering, he reached deep inside himself, releasing the ironclad control he held over his appearance. These days it became more and more difficult to force it back and appear human. His body was grim. It wanted to be grim, no matter how much he liked his old looks. Kurama was lucky in that regard. The little dip had only made him a bit snarkier. His physical form hadn't changed a bit. By contrast, Naruto's change came quickly once he allowed it. In truth, he barely felt a thing. Blue eyes seared red, and his skin turned pale as visible vermilion veins crawled through his whiskered cheeks. Gold faded from his hair, leaving it the color of chalk like white ash. Gone the color of ash. A faint itch at the back of his mind finally abated, and if he'd been clenched in all the muscles in his body for the last 100 years, and finally let go, like an old wood finally being treated, Salem preened a bit, happy to see him in his true form. You really do look better that way, beloved. Maybe so, he groused, forcing the change to recede, but I still don't like it. Feels weird. Ozma hissed in surprise. And the girl, is she? Winnie is our daughter. Salem's voice crackled like a whip. Speak of her in such a manner again, and I'll have you thrown out. Naruto preened. She'd taken the word right out of his mouth, and delivered them with more venom than he could ever hope to muster. I love my wife, Salem, best girl. Ozma recoiled, but managed to master himself. I'm sorry, he muttered, clutching the cup in his hand. This is all so sudden. His fingers treated around it, white knuckles digging into the material. It feels like only yesterday we were wed, and now to find that you moved on. I will admit it has rattled me somewhat. The cup came down as he raised his gaze while touching one tan hand to his face. I suppose I failed you, didn't I? You didn't fail me, Ozma. Salem smiled softly. I cherished our time together. I always will. The poor knight shivered in stoic silence. A pall of silence fell over the three of them. Kurma sighed. Is it wrong that I feel sorry for the poor bastard? Jealousy reared its ugly head in Naruto's heart. He balked at it and tried to stomp the feeling down, but it illed away and threatened to rot him from the inside out. Guilt was all well and good, but when it held you back, kept you from living your best life, then it became something else. A ball and chain dragging you down, a heavy weight that kept you in the past. Their vows were still death did them part. Ozma had been gone for hundreds of years. Salem shouldn't feel any guilt in seeking her own happiness. He certainly didn't, and he was the one missing most of his memories. Even after all these years, they still hadn't returned. Not completely. He remembered a great deal more than he had before, but there was still a gap somewhere in his head, a void that yet to be filled. He didn't know what disaster landed him here. Flashes of vision came at night, sights and sounds, smells he didn't understand. Sometimes he woke up and saw blood in his hands. At others, no. Best not dwell on that. You all right? Yeah, he muttered to himself. I'm good. He shook the thought off. It didn't matter now. Salem did. Wrapping an arm around her waist, he pulled her close. His wife took the opportunity to pivot and press her breast against his right arm. He stiffened, wondering if it was intended on her part. The faintest smile at the corner of her mouth told him all he needed to know. She knew what she was doing to him, rather the effect she was having upon him. Irk, wicked woman. Perhaps it was petty of him, but he tugged her that much closer. Envy wasn't a feeling he liked, but he knew how to silence it all the same. For what it's worth, I understand where you're coming from. No, he didn't, not at all. He lied to Ozma anyway, even as the knight stared him down. Thank you for saving Salem from her tower. Your actions do you credit, and he meant that. He really did. If not for Ozma, they never would have met. For that alone he owed the man, but things had changed, and it was time he made his position clear. Misguided mercy would only confuse things here. Moreover, he wasn't about to give away to a dead man. Maybe if Ozma had returned shortly after his arrival, he might have done so. Eternity was a terrible thing to spend alone, and he'd lived centuries with Salem. To give that up now, to simply make way for someone else? No, not happening. They do, don't they? Ozma blew out a weary breath. I had hoped to reconcile with you and use the relics to help mankind, but relics? Salem perked up, eyes flashing. What relics? Despite the distrust between the two of them, Ozma wasn't able to deny Salem. He told her what he knew, sparse though it was. These relics were four mystical items of great power that, when reunited, would summon the brother gods back to this world to judge humanity. It beggared belief, but the word rang true. Naruto exchanged a long, lingering look with Salem. He knew they were of the same mind and shared the same thought, a way to drag the gods back to Remnant. Were the brothers truly so arrogant as to make such a method? He supposed they knew the answer. The idea of humanity's second destruction was something to be feared, but only so long as the gods were allowed to enact it. Even the god of darkness required several seconds before he wiped the world clean. Salem had told him her tale already. He could use that. These gods were not so omnipotent nor omniscient as they seemed. They could be bested, deceived. Naruto had seen it firsthand with the god of light, and Salem had done so before, tricking the god of darkness. What'd you think, Kurama? Naruto shot a thought inward. We beat one before. Think we can take them both at the same time? Easily. The god of light is likely still weak. It's only his brother we need concern ourselves of. Well, what are we waiting for? Salem slammed to her feet. Let's gather them. Ozma balked. Pardon, surely you jest. We cannot simply. What's a relic? All eyes turned as Winnie crept back into the living room. Once again, Ozma flinched at the sight of her, and this time she ignored him. Is it a shiny thing? Can I have one? Naruto scooted to one side as she clambered over and tucked herself between them. Salem sat back down and uh, e- made way for easily idly running her fingers through the girl's bright blue hair. Winnie hummed happily and nestled herself deeper amidst their legs. Such a greedy girl, she was like a dragon in that regard, always wanting to hoard anything that glittered gold. A stray thought plucked at him as he looked down at her. "Weren't you supposed to wake your sister up?" "She's coming," Winnie answered. "But what's the relic? Is it like the other shinies we have?" Salem laughed and tickled her chin. "I should think not, little one." "Others?" Ozma balked. Only now did he deign to look around their cottage. Only now did he see the strange trophies tacked to the walls, bits of armor, the odd weapon here and there, some of them recent, but others worn and pitted with age. They weren't they weren't for use because they were trophies. Naruto saw the precious moment. Horror dawned in his eyes and hardened into realization. His right hand moved behind his back, touching the vambrace beneath his warm sleeve and the hidden blade within, just in case. "Salem," the knight croaked her name aloud. "Tell me you didn't." "We defend ourselves against trespassers." She didn't bat an eyelash at his accusations. Why should she? Neither of them felt any guilt. "Some wanted our land. We refused. Others came back with torches and pitchforks. We drove them back. Some died, as all men do. But to kill them, you dare judge me?" Her voice sharpened, eyes glowing in the dim light. "You would have done the same if they threatened your home. Nay, Ozma, ever the noble and naive knight, prattled at such an insinuation. I would not. I would have found a better way, spared them, taught them the error of their ways." Salem pulled Winnie close. "Even if they threatened your child?" He clamped up. Naruto released the breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Salem was beginning to understand. She'd been a different person in Ozma's era. She had changed. Ozma had not. It wasn't his fault. He was only recently reincarnated after all. Time held no meaning in the afterlife. He had not suffered the same as Salem, and thus the blame didn't lie with him, but that didn't make him innocent either. Morals were all well and good till you were bleeding out on the ground. In vain he tried to steer the conversation to safer waters. "About the relics?" Ozma's gaze zeroed in on him. "What do you intend to do with them?" "Well, use them, of course." He shrugged. "Isn't that obvious?" The knight shook his head. "I'm afraid I must disagree about that." A faint yawn from the stairs caused all eyes to turn. One widened in shock, two others narrowed with recognition. As they looked on, a delicate girl of 3 years, clad in a Bane nightgown, stumbled their way, scrubbing at her eyes with the back of her pale hands. Poor thing looked half asleep, like a stiff breeze would send her tumbling right back into dreamland. "Well, well," Kerma chortled softly into his mind. "Look who's here." Wide red eyes regarded them, framed by bluish, white hair, messy and unkempt, parted in the middle of her forehead, almost reaching down to her waist. A tiny brown lone horn jutted from the right side of her forehead. When she noticed Naruto, those uncanny red orbs widened further, till in the light she blinked rapidly as though she couldn't quite believe he was there. "Papa!" She raced over to them, a dazzling smile flashing across her cheerful face. "You're back!" "He's been home for hours, sleepyhead." Winnie concealed a grin behind her arm. The youngest stomped a bare foot against the floor. "Am not!" "Girls," Salem chided softly, "behave. Let him fight." "Ow!" Naruto gasped as Salem's elbow hit his ribs. "Never mind. Listen to your mother." Winnie pouted. "Yes, Daddy." Eri didn't answer. She simply lifted her arms and hopped in place. Naruto arched an eyebrow. "And what does my little princess want?" "Up, up!" With a laugh, he swung her up into his arms and planted her in his lap. She looked up and over her shoulder to grin at him. Winnie pouted only to yelp as Salem pulled the girl onto atop hers. Any protests were soon mollified as she began to stroke her scalp. The older girl's eyes fluttered shut in naked bliss. Ozma's expression became noticeably stiff as he gazed at their little family. "Just how many children do you have?" "Only two." Salem touched a hand to her stomach. "We're trying for a third." Abruptly her expression hardened. "Come, let's not dance around this. The relics. We need to gather them and summon the gods. Surely you'll help us in this." "You want to?" The knight jerked back in his seat aghast. "You'll doom us all." No, I won't. Naruto snapped, already irritated by Asuma's outburst. I'll drag the gods down here, beat them, and lift Salem's curse. This world is better off without them. Now where are the relics? Madman! Asuma burst from his chair and flung up his hands. Even if I knew, I'll not tell you. I won't let you risk humanity like this. You won't win against the gods. Naruto shooed Eri off his lap and gently nudged her into Salem's arm. He stood slowly, uncaring, as the couch creaked behind him. One of them murmured something, but he didn't hear them. He only had eyes for the night before him. Ozma glared back at him, then up as the blonde rose to his full towering height. Can, am, have. He leaned forward, leaning over him. Where is your faith? He had none. They were right about you. You're a monster. Oh! Naruto cocked his head and pounced on the slip. And what did the gods say about little old me? No need for secrets now. A hand came down, clamping on the tan man's shoulder. Did they tell you I pounded one of them into the ground? When he only receives a baffled look, his grin grew. No, I thought that. They're playing you, Ozma. Wake up. A hint of something flashed through the sage's eye. Naruto prayed that it was wisdom. They didn't have to do this. Surely he knew that. Ozma batted his hand away and shattered that hope alongside so many others. The air boiled with tension. The children whimpered and sought shelter behind the couch. Something in Salem stirred. I think it's best that you leave. She stood slowly. Before you are made to leave. Ozma flinched. Salem, please. This is your last warning. You, Naruto wasn't at all surprised when the night gaze sought him. Instead, you've corrupted her. She was never like this before. Corrupted! Anger stirred in his heart and the gloves came flying off. Are you kidding me? He stormed forward and Ozma mirrored the motion, no doubt fearing his intention. He was right to. The blonde stormed forward to slam his forehead against the knight's own. That's bullshit, he roared in his face. I saved her. You were gone. You were dead. I got better, as did I, Salem whispered. But both rounded on her at once. Serene red eyes gazed back at them. Naruto winced, knowing full well what was coming. Even Kurama flinched within him. This is going to end poorly, isn't it? Yep. Best brace yourself. I love you, Ozma. His wife spoke calmly and clearly into the silence that followed without a glimmer of hesitation. A part of me always will, but I will not abandon my children. He tried to speak, but she silenced him with a snarl. Till death do us part. Those were our vows. You died. I couldn't follow you into the afterlife. I tried. Her voice broke, but she reined herself in with a shake of the head. I missed you. I mourned you. For nearly 1,000 years I held vigil in your name. Every day I suffered. Would you have me continue to suffer? Would you deny me the end I seek? His anger faltered. No, of course not. Then accept that I have moved on. Scarlet's lids burned in the dark as she offered him her hand. Join us. Help us. Find your own happiness, or continue to be a puppet of the gods. Her words seemed to break the battered man. I'm not their puppet. I'm their champion. Definitely the puppet, and he didn't even realize it. So be it. We'll find the relics on our own then. Salem turned away and pulled their daughters close. Leave Ozma. Now. You are no longer welcome here. I'll not let you do this. He made a desperate for her, only to find his hand slapped away in turn. You cannot stop us. Ice like ice froze him where he stood, nor our army. Naruto sighed. Salem, no need to terrify him. No, I've had enough. She glared at him. Tell me, what happens to a Grim when you remove its mask? Ozma's brow quirked at the question, but still Salem barely onward in spite of him. What miracle occurs when you mix darkness with light and give it human form? Realization and horror dawned in his gaze as he gazed at Eerie. You might be surprised. With his jaw continued to work wordlessly, her smile was cold as black ice. We already have an army in waiting. Soon they will be living, breathing, thinking army. We can create more at any time. We haven't yet because we didn't feel the need. Do you truly wish to test us? This isn't happening. Ozma staggered back, eyes flittering between the two of them. This is a trick, a test, a dream of sort. The gods revived me to bring order to this bridal world. As a hero, you're not acting like a hero, Naruto warned, and you're scaring the children. You heard her. Leave. You knave! Ozma's right hand flew to the sword at his waist and ripped it free from its scabbard with an angry grasp. Eerie cried out in fear. Winnie dove forward and flung herself in front of her sibling. They needn't have worried, for they weren't the target of his ire. Naruto stepped back to shield them regardless. He'd not take the chance. Salem rolled her eyes. "Put that sword away, you silly man. I cannot knight." "You're right." Ozma's smile became tight, eyes narrow. "You cannot. Even if you could, I couldn't bring myself to harm you." Somehow those words only added to the tension. "And so I will save you. Once he's gone, you will see the light. I know you will." "Light!" It was the worst thing he could have said. Salem absolutely hissed. A dark miasma seared around her shoulders. "Light!" The entire world blackened, her voice taking on an angrier contralto. "You dare speak of me of light?" She flung an arm outward, black light trailing from the limb. "Your so-called god of light came to our doorstep and tried to slay me in my sleep." She whirled, stabbing a thumb over her shoulder. "If it wasn't for Naruto, I wouldn't be standing here now. Your precious gods are petty children who do not but blunder about and cause disaster. And yet he fought him. He won. We can beat them. But you—" She swept forth in a rush of shadow, uncaring of the blade. "You would cower out of fear." Her forehead found his, red eyes blazing into his frightened gaze. "Oh, what might or may be? Where is the gallant knight who saved me from my tower? Where was he? Where has he gone? Did he ever exist?" "Impossible." Ozma swept back, widening the blade before his face to stave off an attack. "The gods are absolute. They cannot be beaten. You've been tricked." A faint flash of pity burned in Naruto's heart. Ozma wanted to be the hero, to believe that anything else would be him the villain, and that his pride would not allow. Likewise, Salem wasn't about to abandon her crusade against the gods. Rightfully so, now that she'd been presented with the way to strike at them. An unstoppable force made an unmovable object. It didn't take a genius to guess what would come of this encounter. "Enough!" Salem slashed a hand through the air again, cutting his argument down even as it made one final foolish stand. "If you're not with us, then you're against us." Ozma's face fell. "Only a monster deals with absolute." "Then I am a monster." Salem spread her arms wide with a bitter laugh. "Look upon me and see what you have made." His jaw set itself into a firm line. "I will not do what I will do what I must." She smiled. "You will try, my old friend." In a single step the knight turned and surged past her, bringing the burnishing iron edge of his blade up under Naruto's chin. A thin rivet of blood ran down his throat. The blonde barely batted an eye. He could think of a dozen different ways to snap that blade and bury it in Ozma's chest. Every path ended with the knight bleeding out at his feet, and this wasn't enough to kill him. Rather than attack, he stood there, uncaring of the cruel bite of iron against his flesh. For there was another reason he stayed his hand. Ozma was making the case against himself more than he ever could. "Coward!" Salem howled at her own husband. "Your fight is with me, not him." "You were right," Ozma declared. "I cannot hurt you, but the same cannot be said of him. He was not cursed by the gods. He can die. I will save you, Salem, if it costs me this." And that was enough. Salem had made his point. There was no need for silence now. "Winnie, Eri." Naruto raised his gaze, his eyes gone red once again, rimmed by black. "Close your eyes and cover your ears." Salem flung out an arm. "No!" To his credit, Ozma reacted quickly, even as the girls responded. A bolt of lightning burst from the tip of his sword and burned into Naruto's body with all the force of a lightning storm. He didn't even have words for the pain that followed. Every muscle clamped down as one. Sparks sprawled between his teeth and into his skull, and in that instant he remembered everything. It all came rushing back. Who he was searching for, what he'd done to land him here when it all happened, where he had fallen into this world, and most importantly, why. A voice filled his ears, accompanied by an odd snatch of memory. He looked down at his hands, alarmed to find some bloodied, though he'd not moved an inch. "You're cursed, Naruto Uzumaki." A woman's voice laughed at him. "You simply haven't realized it yet. My misfortune follows your very step." The world snapped back with a rush, leaving him. Suddenly the pain seemed distant, muted, closed off somehow. Red eyes narrowed slowly, painstakingly. He pried the Spartan blade away from his throat, uncaring as it opened at the palm of his head. More of the high voltage current arched into his blood, but that only made the memories come harder, faster, stronger. A strange ringing roar filled his ears, defying them define him to all else. Oh, his eardrums had burst. He willed a pulse tracker to them, and they healed even as blood sluiced down his ears. This tickles. He scowled down at Ozma. Sasuke hit harder. The knight bawled at him. How? A clawed finger slammed into the man's throat and sent him crashing over the chair, then through the door frame. From there he struck the floor, bounced once, and tumbled outside in an ungaling tangle of arms and legs. Just outside, Luna prowled angrily. Ozma cried out, and a harsh bark of lightning filled the night once more, followed by an awful yelp. Luna, down! Salem snarled, her voice gone warped and angry. Keep away from him! Stay with the girls! Naruto spared a glance for their faithful hound as he stormed outside, pausing just long enough to pat the beast's singed hide. The mighty beast pressed a wet snout against his palm. He looked down and saw that it was missing one of its forelegs. Something hardened inside of him. Grim were grim, but this creature was loyal. It had protected his family through thick and thin. Easy there, he crooned, stroking her hide. Just hang on and leave this to me. I'll have your mask off in a jiff after this. You'll be good as new. A faint huff was the Grim's only response as it lay down. He patted its head. Good girl. Content that the hound would live to find another day. To fight another day, the blonde stepped over the ruined porch and stepped out after the wizard into the night. Scarlet slits squinted harshly, adjusting to the sudden lack of light. The sun had long since set by now, leaving them with naught but the shattered moon to see by. He tasted rain on the wind and looked up to find dark clouds rolling in, threatening to blot out even that faint radiance. A storm was coming, or perhaps that was some measure of Ozma's magic at work. Best wrapped this up before someone really got her. A bolt of fire blazed at his face. He caught it in his right hand and snuffed it out like a brown candle, but it cost him his night vision. We don't have to do this, you know. He raised his hands and peered into the dark. We can still talk things through. Just lay down your weapon and razor eyes slashed across his face from the darkness, annihilating his left eye. It regrew immediately, leaving a throbbing ache behind. A muscle jumped in his jaw, and a spark of anger flared at him, flared to life in him. He tried to stamp it down, to no avail. This wasn't right. He wasn't natural. Calm down. Calm down. Don't lose control. Oh, screw it. Congratulations! His voice rose in a shout as the wind began to pick up. You've made me angry. I hope it was worth it. Now let's just calm down. And Kerma snarled and warning, and he turned as the sixth sense shrieked, Monster! Demon! Abomination! A shadow leaped from his peripheral vision. The world has no need of you. Begone! Ozma dove at him with a snarl, sword weaving a web of iron about his body. Good swordsmanship, downright admirable, really. It wasn't enough. Naruto dodged the first strike, parried the second with the vampires, and stepped into the third, ignoring it entirely as it slammed down into his shoulders. Ozma must have reinforced his blade through magic means, because the crude iron held when it slashed into his flesh. Blinded by pain, the Jinchuriki lashed out and slammed the fist forward. Ozma was not sturdy, not like Salem. No, not at all like Salem. He felt the awful moment when which flesh and bone gave way, felt his fist slam into the man's stomach and tear right through to the other side. Something in him balked. He hadn't meant to do that. He judged Ozma by Salem's standards of strength. That was a mistake. Aghast, he stepped back and ripped his bloodied hand free. He expected to feel something, and he did. Surprise, shock, even a hint of regret. Damn it! I didn't mean to. Ozma swayed to his feet, eyes wide. Just like that, the knight stumbled and fell onto his back with wordless croak. It seemed an anticlimactic end, all things considered. At the end of the day, Ozma was no god. He was just a man, a merciful pile of secrets, nothing more. Whatever magic he possessed, it wasn't enough to stop him. 1,000 curses be upon you, he gasped, the blood bubbling from his lips. I will not let you destroy humanity. Stupid, stupid, stupid. He didn't hate humanity. Far from it. Naruto shook his head, feeling a pang of regret. I don't want to destroy them. Lies and more lies. Asuna granted him a grin. Teeth stained red with blood, it left him looking like a madman. Monsters always lie. I will protect them. How? You can't even protect yourself. It didn't have to be this way. You will never know peace. Still, the knight continued to rave at him in his dying moments. I will train others, teach them to fight against you and your monsters. They will be huntsmen and scour the grim from the earth. Crazed eyes met his, wild and bloodshot. I will find the relics and seal them away. Kill me now if you wish. I will return. Reincarnate. Return. What was he on about? A rasped breath. Now you realize you will never be rid of me. The light will prevail. Naruto hesitated. Could he really kill him in cold blood? He wanted to. He longed to. Did he deserve it? A bolt of black light burst from the house, a sword over his shoulder, and lanced through Ozma's chest to spear his still beating heart. Blood burst from his lips, bright eyes widened in surprise, then recognition, now shock, followed by horror. He balked at the hole in his chest, not quite comprehending what had happened at first, but then he knew. Naruto saw the moment the man's heart shattered, followed by what remained of his mind. A faint series of footsteps swelled in the night. He didn't have to look to know who it was. Osmond rasped a low word. Say, um. The Queen of the Grim stepped over his dying form and thrust a pale hand into his face. Baffled red eyes bored into him, brimming with intent. Her arm trembled. You fool! She spat at him, tears running down her face. You absolute bloody fool! We were finally free! Why do this? This is all your fault! Here at last something akin to regret flashed across Ozma's bloodied visage. It hardened into anger. Then you are lost! He opened his mouth to speak further, and black fire burst from Salem's palm to silence him forever. His upper torso vanished in a rush of napalm, obliterated before his lips could form the words. By rights, it was a quick death. He didn't even have time to scream. Salem blasted him away, a fresh surge of heat destroying his remains. She did so again, yet again, again, until naught but ashes and charred remained. Thus did Ozma, first of his name, perish. It was but a single solitary death, the first of many more that were to come. Salem sank to her knees and collapsed among those ashes with a sob. I killed him. I actually killed him. She had. This was going to give her nightmares all over again. Blank red eyes gazed right past him. Why? Why did it have to be this way? Books tend to romanticize the art of crime. They call it a beautiful thing, wax poetic about it endlessly. Crying is not romantic, nor is it beautiful. It is a painful, awful, heartbreaking thing. Most of all when you watch a loved one break down, shoulders heaving, chest wrecked with anguished breaths. Salem curled on herself. She screamed and shouted and shrieked, tearing at the ground with her hands, little bursts of magic shooting from her fingers to scare the landscape. Her lips moved, trying to form words, to offer some semblance of speech, but only a wail escaped her. Why? Salem wasn't merely weeping for Ozma or the past they'd shared. After so long she had been given hope in the form of the relics, only to have it snatched away again. The pain was too much to bear. Remnant was a massive world with multiple continents, oceans, plains, mountains. They could be anywhere. No one knew the exact location of the relics. It could take centuries to find them, millennia even. Even if his shadow clone scoured every inch of the world, every nook and cranny, it would take time. Time in which they and their descendants would be harassed by Ozma and his ilk, time in which they were forced to fend off a nemesis who would reincarnate endlessly. It wasn't fair, not a bit of it. When Naruto dared to lay a hand on Salem's shoulder, she rounded on him with wild eyes. She didn't see him. In her madness, she looked right through him. Her hand lashed out. He caught her and drew her close, pulling her chin over his shoulder. She collapsed against him, fighting at first, then growling calm as he held tight to her. You're all right, he whispered, stroking the small of her back. You're going to be all right. We'll find a way out of this. She hiccuped slowly. Damn him. Damn the gods. To give us hope, then snatch it away. Naruto didn't trust himself to speak further. He simply held her and she him. Her tears stained his ruined jacket, and still he didn't let go. I hate them, I hate them, I hate them. It's all right, he rasped. I do too. Ozma's parting words also rankled Naruto's heart. By all rights, this was a victory. They were alive. Ozma was likely reincarnated as an infant somewhere. If his threats were to be believed, that he wouldn't be a real danger of some time. They were alive. The girls were alive, hiding inside under Luna's watchful gaze. So why did it feel like defeat? You will never know peace. It felt like a bitter taste in his mouth for all the wrong reasons. Ari and Winnie were going to be terrified of humanity after this. He'd have to go back inside and console them in the vain hope that they wouldn't be scarred from this encounter. And then what would they do? Hide away in the woods again? Let the gods steal away their happiness? Piss on that. Ozma wanted to find the relics, hide them away, turn the world against them. Not happening. Blue eyes flashed as he stood, pulling Salem with him. We won't let him win. The blonde pinched the brow of his nose with a drawn-out sigh. If that's how he wants to play, let's play. We'll make something better. He gazed at his hand, saw something he didn't like there, and made a fist. If he's going to make these huntsmen of his, then we'll show him. We've got centuries ahead of us. That's time enough to stop him. You... what? I know that look. Salem leaned against his side, her voice still hoarse from her tears. What are you thinking? Naruto didn't answer her, not at first. Wait. Kurama knew that at once. You're serious about this idea of yours? This isn't something you can take back. Was he? Not at all. He wouldn't be happy living in a quiet life in the countryside. Ozma and the gods would never let that happen. He knew that now. It was time he took the initiative. Time he made changes of his own, for better or worse. They would need to be careful about this. Very careful indeed. It would take time. But then again, they had all the time in the world, didn't they? Remnant was broken and fractured, little more than a band of warring fools. Someone needed to bring order. Did he dare allow that order to be Ozma's? He knew his answer. Naruto forced the trembling fingers of his hand into a fist. I won't let him win. We'll find the relics and I'll lift your curse. But first, we'll need help. Salem's teary gaze sharpened upon his. What kind of help? Naruto knew he had to choose his words carefully. Very, very carefully. Deep inside him, he felt something begin to fray. He shoved it aside. They had a goal. Find the relics wherever they were, gather the relics to drag the brother gods down to Remnant and beat them into submission once and for all. It was a grand plan, and not at all the sort that could be accomplished in a day. They would need help, of course, more than his shadow clones could provide. They need allies, not many, but enough to turn the tide in their favor, enough to safeguard the future. They'd scour every brightened continent if they had to, so long as they found those relics. He made a promise after all. He had sworn to save Salem at any cost. He would not break his word. No matter what happened, he would help it. He would keep it. Steeling himself, Naruto took a deep breath and let go of his fears. They floated away, and a cool winter breeze. Blue eyes rose to meet red. The former narrowed intently upon the latter. Salem tensed in his arms, perhaps realizing what he was to suggest. He spoke before she could. How do you feel about teaching our children ninja arts? Previews. Daddy, teach us, teach us. Naruto grunted as Eri and Winnie slammed into his back. He slammed forward into the ground. Ouch! Felt that one in my soul. The tribe was burning everything as a fire, smoke, and burning ash. There she is! A masked man pointed at her hiding place in the ruins. Take her. She'll join her brother and the other children for the Dark Lady. A young raven Bronwyn barely had time to scream before a sack descended on her head. She was only 7. My lady, I believe we found a relic. Salem smiled. Another mask came off. Rise. The stone struck him in the face. Naruto turned uncaring of the blood running down his brow. That girl is not a monster. You're the monsters. Let he who is blameless throw the next stone. You've had a hard life, haven't you, little one? A young cinder looked up from scrubbing the floors and gazing into bright blue eyes. She was only 8 years old. She saw a man. There was a woman with him. It's all right now. The latter offered a hand to her. Pale cheeks dimpled in a smile, warm as a sweet summer breeze. Because we are here. End of chapter 14.